Welcome in, everybody, to the 10th episode of Bulletin Sports Talk. I'm your host, Brian Rathbun, and on today's show, we have two guests. We have Robby Scharf of Mid-Major Media to talk about what's going on in 4A football and what their plan is for their BCS-style football championship, whatever you want to call it. A lot of moving pieces in that as they enter the final week of their season. But first up, we got Josh Worden, who covers Oregon State in a number of ways, just to talk about the Beavers' most recent run to the Elite Eight, which sadly came to an end on Monday against Houston. So without further ado, here's Josh. Alrighty, joining me now is an old friend who covers Oregon State who's been covering Oregon State for a long time. So if you're a Beaver fan, you probably recognize his name, and you'll probably recognize his voice. Joining me now, the Josh Worden. How you doing, Josh?
Brian, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm doing well. It's a good day to talk about Beaver basketball, even though they did lose yesterday, but it was a great season. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Josh, just it's weird talking about Beaver basketball as we approach March or as we approach April.
Yeah.
Usually mid-February, it's okay. When's baseball starting?
Right. Growing up, like March Madness was always my favorite time of the year, and it just never really felt realistic that Beaver basketball would be a part of it, honestly. And that was true of men's and women's at the time. And then the women's basketball team became a mainstay, and all of a sudden the men's basketball team's making a run through the Sweet 16 to the Elite Eight.
Yeah, that's just the awesome thing about it is it was just so unexpected. You know, like you said, we all love March Madness. I love March Madness, but you all kind of like adopt teams who you love, and you pick these Cinderella stories, or like Cinderella teams that you're just like, oh man, hope they go far. They pull all these upsets, and it's so much better when it's your team.
It really is. I mean, honestly, that's part of the reason why I love March Madness so much, is because you could fill out a bracket and root for anybody. Because obviously I always want Oregon State. I grew up in Corvallis, long Beaver history, all that. Mom was a coach and that sort of thing. But, if Oregon State doesn't play in March Madness, it's like, okay, who cares? Unless you've got the bracket and then you fill it out and then you've always got a team to root for in every game. And that's the fun of watching sports, is you have a team to root for. And so Oregon State never needed to be in it for it to be fun. But now that they've made it 2 times in the past 5 years, it's like, now it's actually relevant here for once. This is good.
Yeah, crazy. Two times in 5 years. That's just. We went our whole lifetimes without seeing them make it that far. Now twice in 2 years, and now they have a Elite Eight run. You follow this Oregon State basketball probably much closer than I do these days. I've probably watched a grand total of a game this year until the Pac-12 championship. Mm-hmm. Did you see any inklings of this type of run from them throughout the year?
There were inklings, but not Elite Eight inklings. There were signs that the team was not bad. And it was, okay, once they lost to Arizona, right? They lost, it was like, oh gosh, are they going to lose by 40? And they ultimately didn't quite lose by 40. And that was like the one good thing about the game, is they didn't quite lose by 40. And it got real bad. And at that point, after the loss to Arizona, I thought, are they going to win another Pac-12 game this season? And they started to get better. I mean, I think it was the very next game. They beat Arizona State. They beat UCLA, or beat USC shortly after. And then they'd lose one or two. They'd lose a couple on a road trip. Then they'd split one at home. And they would kind of back, and it was like, okay, this team actually is okay. Not great, but they actually aren't going to finish 12th. Like, they actually are going to finish 9th or 10th, which is slightly better, And it was like, there's inklings of mediocrity. Maybe even better than, I don't like the word mediocre. It's so dismissive, although it may have been appropriate in this case. They were halfway decent, but not, I didn't expect them to win more than one game in the Pac-12 tournament. So inklings, yes, depending on what inklings means of mediocrity, yes, but never Elite Eight, not until they got there. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of, I still like kind of follow them on, social medias, kind of keep tabs on them. And every once in a while, they'd be like, is this team good? Like I was like generally like what? Like, man, is Oregon State like good? Because they have like these, good wins. They beat Oregon, they, beat USC, have these runs, and then like I'd like tune in and watch like 10 minutes and they would just be like awful. It's like maybe there's better when I don't watch. just something like that. And then you know, for me, the bar for Oregon State basketball is kind of low. It's like I was thrilled they came back and beat UCLA in the tournament. I was like, hey, good showing, good showing. That's enough. And then everything after that was kind of gravy. Just I still, it's like, is a team I just like didn't know anything about. Like if you like gun to my head, if I had to name 5 players from the team, I wouldn't be here. I knew Ethan Thompson, Reichel, and Jared Lucas, but after that, no one. So it was just kind of fun, just kind of learning about these guys the last couple weeks.
It really was the unknown team because there were so many newcomers. I mean, there's so many transfers. They brought in Maurice Kalu, they brought in Rodri Gandela, they brought in Warith Alatishe, they brought in Tariq Silver. Roman Silva had transferred in a little bit before those guys. I looked at the roster and I realized partway through the NCAA tournament run, there's 13 guys on the roster, and 11 of them were in their first or second year of their time at Oregon State, which also meant they had not lost a postseason game at OSU, yeah. Pac-12 tournament included, because they had won their only Pac-12 tournament game last year. Then the tournament got canceled to beat Utah, and then they win 3 in the tournament and then win 3 in the NCAA tournament before finally losing. But it was just so many newcomers, so many transfers. And so for people who maybe watch most of the time and then this COVID year didn't really follow it as much, it was like, who the heck is this team other than Ethan? Yeah, the guys you named, Ethan Thompson, Zach Reichel, 2 of the only guys who had been in the program for more than a couple of years. It was just like so many new guys. And it was fun to watch them, but it took a while to really get to know them. And some of them, especially Warith, were still growing into their own. So it was just an unknown team that made themselves known by the end of the season.
Yeah, also us understanding it's like, oh no, that's not his game. He needs to be doing this instead, and just like critiquing like, oh man, Altisha, he's so much better from like 6 feet from the basket than he is from like 2 feet from the basket, and just like I'm like known these guys my whole life, but I don't even know if I'm pronouncing their names right most of the time.
Oh no, it was fun though. I mean, it ended up being a great run. It was just so much fun to watch.
Yeah, that was just because you just get these teams that just all of a sudden just like figure something out, and it can't really be described like what they figured out, because I'm sure these are like, was this kind of like a similar rotation they had kind of throughout the year? What were they doing those last 8 games that maybe they weren't doing before?
Yeah, one of the switches they had made earlier in the season was taking Maurice Kalu out of the starting lineup and they put Jared Lucas in, which I think offered a bit more of a scoring punch, although the numbers didn't change all that drastically after that. And it's kind of funny because one of the guys who actually sparked that tournament run, especially in the Pac-12 tournament championship and then some of the NCAA games, was Maurice Kalu, the very guy who'd been dropped out of the starting lineup and at times just dropped out of the rotation almost entirely. So it was a little bit of a lineup change, and each game kind of looked different. I mean, there's one game where Rodri Gandela didn't play at all. I think that was the Oklahoma State game. Or no, Loyola. I think it was Oklahoma State game. Oklahoma State. And then De'Aaron Tucker played, and then De'Aaron didn't play like at all against Loyola. So it was kind of game to game, but it seemed the constant through the lineup upheaval of maybe too strong a word, because every coach makes different playing time for each game, is they kind of figured out what worked well offensively to at least get decent numbers. They were never really putting up 80 or 90 a game, but the defense got a lot better. They were switching man-to-man to zone. The 1-3-1 was decent, if not really good at a long stretch, and 2-3 zone every once in a while. And so I think the defense was kind of the key thing. And you saw in the NCAA tournament, every time they played a team, whatever the scoring output of that team was during the season, like if they averaged, I think Loyola, for example, averaged 75, they'd score like 10 to 15 below that. Loyola scored 58 against Oregon State. And so mainly I would say it was just a strong defensive, consistent composure.
Yeah, that's composure was definitely evident. Like I watched the whole tournament with my parents, and they were just it was poise that kind of kept, what was the word that kind of kept being brought up, because you just kind of, as an Oregon State fan, you like the basketball program, they've had like good stretches, but you always just kind of wait for, that other shoe to drop, and just that basically since like the Oregon game, you're just kind of like waiting for that other shoe to drop, and it just never came. It's like, oh, Oklahoma State would get close, they'd extend the lead. Chicago or Loyola would get close, just kind of build the lead. It was just kind of bizarre because it was so abnormal to what Oregon State basketball fans are probably used to seeing the last couple decades.
Exactly. I was thinking to get to the Elite Eight, and for a while in that Elite Eight game, it started to seem like, okay, the Magic's running out. They're finally going to get thumped. And then even then, it was second half. Oh, my gosh, they're competitive. Oh, they came back and tied it. And, okay, finally, they stumbled a little bit, couldn't rebound. All right, they did lose by 6. But even then, we're talking about Oregon State, if they just made a few more free throws, if they just rebound a little bit better, we're saying they may have left something on the table in the Elite Eight and maybe should have gone to the Final Four. And to even say that is crazy, because I think, okay, the last time Oregon State had made the NCAA tournament was 1990, up until they broke that streak in 2016. So if you think, this is the hypothetical I was running through my head earlier today. If you took every season, every Oregon State basketball team, 91, 92, 93, all the way through the 2000s, and let's include 2016, even though they actually made the tournament, 17, 18, 19, 20. If you just took that team and just threw them into the Elite Eight, so you get to the NCAA tournament, and then any one of those Elite Eight matchups, just put Oregon State in that game and just see what happens against an Elite Eight team, you know how well they would do in those Elite Eights for everyone in the tournament? I bet they would have lost almost every, if not every one of those games, and probably by a huge margin, most of those. And now we're talking about nearly making the Final Four, having actually legitimately made the tournament and won the 3 games to get there. And it's just like, this is not normal. I hope it becomes normal, but this has not been the norm.
Yeah, I was just talking with my parents. It was just like, this is just like, this isn't going to be an every year thing. And so it's just like, can they be a tournament team every year? Maybe, the hope is that, they get to March and they're playing their best ball, and they can make some sort of run or are a tough out in the Pac-12 tournament. And then who knows what happens, NCAA tournament. But man, it was just, it's just crazy thing. Cause like you said, that first half, they're like, all right, they finally ran out of whatever, magic they were able to harness. And they came back from 17 down and tied it. And it's just like, are we about to go to the Final Four? Like, it was just so, this whole thing has just been so, I just haven't been able to comprehend how this is all happening. Cause it just, like I said, it's like nothing we've seen as Oregon State fans for most of us, at least us younger people in our lifetime.
Right. Not for men's basketball. There was just a magic about it where every game they were underdogs by typically 6 to 7 points, if not more. And they had, that UCLA came back. And even there, it was had UCLA made both free throws at the end, and they would have just gone 0-1 in the Pac-12 tournament. And it would have been okay, that was probably expected. Finish still decent year. They got the 5 seed in the Pac-12 tournament. That's way better than 12th. Win that game. Beat Oregon, who had just beaten them. Beat Colorado, who had thumped them by 25 or 30 earlier in the season. Then, we beat the 5 seed. We beat the 4 seed. We beat the team that just beat the 1 seed. We almost beat the 2 seed. It's just one thing after another. By the end, I was I just can't even surmise Oregon State losing. I know they probably will at some point, but I just can't. If they haven't done it yet, I'll wait for it to happen, and then they'll say, okay, they lose. But at that point, I was I just can't pick against them. How could you?
Yeah. And it was just really too bad because, they come all the way back to tie it. And then there's another, Houston gets a couple of offensive rebounds, and it seemed like every time they'd get a third chance, they always made a 3. And it was just
yeah,
I think Houston was pretty good.
Houston was so good, so athletic, and just, if it's just a battle of who can grind it out on the boards and get in transition, Houston's going to beat probably every team in the country, or almost every team. And Oregon State did great just to stay in that game. And yeah, it was just a lot of things went Oregon State's way. I mean, that 3-pointer where Giroux threw it up and then they called it back, which was like, man, I'd be so mad if I was a Houston fan. And then the 3-pointer that Gianni banked in, which I think was the very next possession. So it was like a banked in 3-pointer that got taken away, banked in 3-pointer that goes your way. And I think that was the one that tied it. And then that was like 3.5 minutes left, and then Houston got 8 offensive rebounds in the remaining like 3.5 minutes. It was like, all right, they did what they needed to do. Oregon State did a 1-3-1 and played well with it, but just couldn't box out within that 1-3-1 and gave up too many rebounds. But still a fun game.
Yeah, I just think Houston was just a little more athletic. Like Alatisha, he's probably the team's best rebounder. Am I pronouncing his name right?
Yeah, Alatisha.
Okay.
Warith,
okay.
Alatisha. Yep, yes. You got it.
Okay. I love the way he rebounds, and there was one like late in the game when it's close, and he, anytime like he was like going for a board, I was expecting him to get it, but there was a Houston guy that just out jumped him, and I was just like, they're just better.
Yeah,
there's a little bit longer, a little bit more athletic, and it was really just sad to see it end. But man, what a crazy couple weeks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Houston had this isn't exactly true, but for every Warith Oregon State they had like 2 or 3 guys who could jump almost as well as him. But I mean, Warith in particular been so fun to watch. From the very first game I watched, Oregon State played Cal, and I was doing the public address announcing. I think that was their season opener, and I watched him play, and I was like, oh, this guy's for real. Like, nobody knows this guy. He scored 1 point per game a couple years ago at Nicholls State, transfers to the Pac-12. And I was like, this guy's going to do something this year. And then it was like, in the middle portion of the season, he wasn't really doing that much. He'd just score like 5 points a game and get like 9 rebounds, but not do all that much offensively. He couldn't really shoot. And then he started to pick it up. And he wasn't still shooting well, and that's not his game. But he would just get some monster dunks, rebound the heck out of the ball, find his spots, and he became a force in the Pac-12 tournament, most outstanding player.
Yeah, and deserve, man. He was fun to watch. I just always like trust him, just like with like the 6 foot away floater than like a layup, because it seemed like there was a stretch where like he like botched every layup, but every like time he took like one of those just like just one of those floaters, it was going in. It was just such a team where like everyone had just a very defined and like different skill set. They somehow made it work. I don't know.
I think if you put every Pac-12 player, maybe in the nation, on like a spectrum, I think Jared Lucas and Warith Alatisha might be the 2 most disparate, different players, and they're on the same team. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jared Lucas is not the most athletic guy, but he can shoot from NBA range. Warith Alatisha shoots free throws like Charles Barkley swings a golf club. Like, that's his shooting stroke, but he's just absurd bounce, like just the most 2 polar opposite players, and to see them on the floor together, and they work well together, it's super fun to watch.
Yeah, and then just like Roman Silva, he was just good at being big. There's a lot of big guys that just don't do that. They just like don't want to be big, and he was just like, I'm just gonna be here and I'm gonna be big. Yep, he does that well. Yeah, one more thing before I let you go, Nathan. Not Nathan, Josh.
My brother's Nathan. He can join too.
Okay, yeah, bring him on. Ethan Thompson. What a kind of a way to close. And I usually hate like ranking players like where they're in the OSU hierarchy, but I think he probably made one of the biggest jumps of just like all-time OSU player. I don't know where he is. Probably not ahead of like Gary Payton and AC Green, but man, he put himself in the conversation. Maybe, I don't know, easily top 10.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you value postseason success, because I mean, Oregon State had never won 4 games in an NCAA tournament ever, and they nearly did that yesterday. They made the Final Four before, but that was back when the tournament was smaller, and so to be the best player on the team that nearly became the lowest seed ever in NCAA tournament history to make the Final Four, to win 3 games in just unprecedented fashion, at least at Oregon State. He was fun to watch. I mean, he when he came into OSU, and I remember watching him 3-4 years ago, and just the bounce he had. He's springier than Steven. He's got a shooting stroke somewhat similar to Stevie, but he dunks a lot more than Stevie. and he's fun to watch. He's not the quickest guy ever, but he makes the most of it. And he'll be remembered for a long time. And I don't think he said exactly if he's coming back. He kind of got the feeling that he's not. But if he does leave, then he ended on a good note.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. But basically, the whole team can come back because everyone gets an extra year to COVID. So,
right, yeah. So
I almost don't want that. I'd rather him go off and kind of team just kind of do its thing. Just because everyone comes back and I'm like, oh, this is an Elite Eight team again. Just don't want to just tarnish that team by flopping next year.
It deserves to be said. I'm not saying a future Oregon State team cannot make the Elite Eight, but if they do, it should be met with similar fervor and I don't want to say surprise, but people talk about hey, now they made this, that'll set the stage for doing this again in the future. Yes. But if that was so black and white true, then every team that made the Elite Eight would make it the next year. And then there wouldn't be any room for a new team to make it, right? So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I do hope it sets the stage for a lot of good things. But even already now, Wayne Tinkle has now won as many NCAA tournament games as Ralph Miller in his career. 3.
There's Josh Warden's stat for us.
There you go. And that wasn't even me. Mike Parker told me that one. So credit Mike on that. But, Wayne, I hope Wayne comes back and wins number 4 and 5 and 6 next year. But even if not, this year was a good one to savor for a while.
Absolutely. It's just, I'm still just I woke up today and I'm sad because it was just such a fun couple weeks. Just man, how far can they go? It's it started with, man, they're playing the Pac-12 championship. That's cool. That doesn't happen very often. And then, they won the Pac-12. Now they're in the tournament. That's only happened twice. They just kept winning and winning and winning. It's crazy.
That was maybe the best part. There was no ceiling. Sometimes if you're a 15 seed or a 16 seed and you win that first game, that's great. And you made history. You joined an elite club. But you're not going to win the national championship. You're just playing as far as you can and you're eventually going to lose. It did not feel like Oregon State was guaranteed to lose. There was a small chance, at least in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, but there was at least a small chance that they could have run the table. They nearly beat Houston, would have been in the Final Four. I don't know. They probably would not have beaten Baylor, but they could have the way they were playing. There was technically a chance that they could win the national championship there. And just to be okay, there was not a cap there. We're not just playing to eventually lose. We're playing to perhaps win. And they could have, and they didn't, and that's fine. National championships are really hard to come by. But that was really refreshing to think, that's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, no, they're playing really well. They're a surprisingly kind of deep team. Whenever they brought in the bench, I was like, man, Kalu's in. I like Kalu or Silver. He was he averages 1 point a game. He's making big buckets every time. Just what a run. So how long do you start before you start the narrative podcast on this team?
Yes, thanks for asking. Yeah, I texted someone jokingly, if they win the national championship, I'm gonna make a whole podcast documentary on them. And I'm just now finishing the baseball one on the 2018 championship. I did set a date. I'll break the news on your podcast because I haven't really said this. I haven't tweeted out or anything, but I've set a date. It's coming out April 21st. People can listen to it for free. So it's called Dynasty in the Woods. 2018 Beaver baseball team podcast documentary. Interviewed most of the players in that team and coaches and media members. So it starts coming out for free April 28th. If you pay $20, you can get it all the episodes right away April 21st rather than waiting week by week for each episode. So if you go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, and search for Beaver Tales, that's the name of my podcast, and then I'll upload all those later this month. So Beaver Tales, Tales. There's my little plug. So thanks for doing that.
Hey, I love breaking stories on the podcast. I think this is the first one. Again, this is Josh Worden of what radio station?
KEJO, Joe
KEJO.
Radio. Yeah.
Longtime Beaver fan, OSU podcaster, just a pretty good dude all around, Josh. It was a pleasure to have you on, and it was great catching up.
Yeah, you too, Brian. Let's road trip to San Francisco again sometime soon, or Berkeley, or wherever we're going. That'd be fun. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
I'm down. I'm down. All right, Josh, you have a good one. All right, and now we're bringing in Robby Scharf of Mid Major Media to find out what the heck is going to happen this final week in 4A football. So here's Robbie. All right, we're joined here with Robby Scharf of Mid Major Media. We're going to chat just a little bit about kind of the 4A postseason, which just last week kind of announced that they were going to, maybe a week and a half ago, announced that they're going to have some sort of statewide postseason, which is obviously kind of new to the school year this year and kind of how they're kind of dealing with the postseason in high school athletics. So anyway, Robbie, how you doing today?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So just quick little kind of rundown of kind of what they're doing is, for like soccer and volleyball, they're having kind of an 18 tournament, which makes sense. They're having the conference champions kind of automatically make it. Then they have kind of those second place finishers. There's going to be 2 at large, and then kind of those next 6 are kind of like backups if a team has to bow out due to COVID or for whatever reason. That makes perfect sense. Cross country, there's going to be a state meet with the plan to be in Tillamook. Is that right?
Sounds right.
All right. And then we'll roll with it. And then football, which is the interesting one, has the BCS style, which I don't think is popular at all. It wasn't popular with college athletics, and it doesn't seem to be too popular amongst the high school or the 4A sports world. But what are your kind of thoughts of just kind of the postseason and how they're kind of moving forward with that?
Well, the problem is it's not even really BCS, because the BCS took in, and mostly operating off memory here, but it was a heavy influence from computers. There was, coaching influence, media influence, and all that kind of stuff, but it was predominantly taken out of the human hands. The problem with the BCS system in college was that it was only 2 teams. And so that's where the playoff came into existence. And then it was no computer influence. It was completely hands-on with humans. The setup with what 4A is doing right now is taking parts of the BCS, parts of the current college football playoff system, part of media polls, part of the ways that worked, and just kind of rolling it all into one and seeing if they can figure out 2 teams. Mm-hmm. Ethically, it is admirable to have some sort of champion crowned at the end of the season in whatever way that can come, but it's not incredibly clear at the moment if it's even going to be recognized as a champion. It's not even really recognized if it's going to be seen as official in any capacity, because the thing in 4A right now is that it's not really a 2-horse race in at least most people's views. There are some people that, it's, 1 horse, maybe even Mazama's kind of impressing people. But the problem is with 4A is that you're going to get a whole lot of half-baked conclusions and a whole lot of angling, whether real or perceived, that is going to bring controversy to this. And that's the problem. The aim is admirable. Mm-hmm. The execution of it, and this has generally been agreed upon with everyone I've talked to, the execution of it is where the problem is. It's the logistics of it.
Yeah, bringing it down to a committee, do you by chance know how many people are on this committee? Is it
my understanding is that it's 2 athletic directors / coaches. There's some athletic directors that are head coaches per league. That's my understanding, at least from what I collected in some of the interviews and some of the people we've talked to over the last week, is that it's 2 people per league. That might be wrong, but that's what we've gathered.
Okay. Yeah, I can just you're much more plugged into the 4A kind of level than I am, these days. But like you said, it seems to be kind of Mazama's kind of separate itself. They're coming off kind of that big win against Thurston, who's a 5A power themselves. And then you have, I think the most recent rankings that has Mazama. Let's see.
I believe it had Marshfield at 2.
Yeah, Marshfield 2. Gladstone was at 4, and Gladstone's kind of that team that I think people are kind of iffy on.
That Gladstone is the sticking point. You can never get – the thing is, talking to media members, coaches, athletic directors, and just people in general, you will never find an agreed upon opinion on Gladstone. That is the one thing that is just a sticking point for everybody, is no one can figure out where to put Gladstone. They're a good team. I watched them play Crook County. They're a good team. They have good dudes.
Yeah, Crook County's solid. They've put together kind of a nice run this year. But yeah, Gladstone, and then obviously like kind of the probably one of the more talented 4A teams, Hidden Valley. They're ranked pretty low because they haven't played.
Yeah, that's a touchy subject. Anyone that interacts with us on Twitter knows that that's a touchy subject for us. We ran a piece yesterday about the whole situation with them being excluded in the first rounds of these rankings and why that was and how it got rectified to a point. But now they're probably the second or third most talented team in the state, but they're ranked 10th. It's been quite a journey with that.
Yeah, it's almost like they're just like Ohio State of this last college football year. They've missed some games. No one's going to deny that they're one of the top teams. I mean, they have a couple Division I prospects at the 4A level, which is pretty rare for.
Well, the question is are you ranking teams based off of how they can compete, or are you ranking teams based off their resume? Because if you're ranking off their resume, then yeah, Mazama's at 1 and probably Marist is 2 and Marshfield's at 3, but you got to be kidding me if you're going to put Hidden Valley at 10. In terms of talent, coaching, pair, and just the general setup of Hidden Valley football, there's no way they're 10th. There's no way they're 10th.
And for those that don't know, Hidden Valley, they ran into some COVID issues. Is that correct? Where they weren't able to play?
Yes,
so
they missed 2 consecutive weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
And already on a 6-week schedule, which is that's a 30-year season.
Missing about 4 games in a normal year. That's missing like 4 games out of a regular season.
Yeah, so it's tough. Like I don't know what to do. I don't know if it's the right call to put them in. It's like, hey, we know this team's good. I know they're in this. They are in the same league as Mazama. I'm forgetting the conference's name. The
Skyline.
There you go. So that would have obviously been like kind of a big matchup between those two teams. But man, it's like is there anything like there's not much they can do because they can't like make up these games because this coming Saturday is the final like rankings, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing about this whole setup. And again, the aim of it is admirable. The reason for it existing is genuinely can be propped up. I mean, it's you're making a good effort. Okay? But the result, and you can look down the road on these things. It's not a 3-month season. You're looking down a couple weeks. Is Hidden Valley and Mazama, realistically, if this system had not been cooked up, would have played each other week 6. Anyway, assuming here that they would have played week 6. They're 2 league opponents. They're relatively close. And they're 2 high-profile teams. Okay, Mazama, I'm assuming, again, I'm not an AD, but I'm assuming Mazama would rather go over to Hidden Valley and play in Murphy rather than drive to Banks or Gladstone to play a week 6 game. I'm assuming here, but let's just assume that's the matchup. That matchup, schematically, talent-wise, might be more captivating and might end up being more even matched than what would exist with Marist or Marshfield against Mazama. Now, that's just an example, but it's possible because, as we said, Hidden Valley is loaded with talent. So what are the ethics? What's the feasibility of putting someone like, let's just say it's Mazama and Marist in week 6 versus just letting the cards fall where they may, the chips fall where they may, and you end up with Hidden Valley, Mazama week 6, and Marist playing someone like Banks? You're going to end up with high-profile matchups anyway. You're going to have a fight over who's in the 2 spot, who's in the 3 spot. It's a little questionable.
Yeah, it really just kind of seems like they just kind of opened up a can of worms because like you said, Mazama, they obviously have probably the most impressive win of anyone. Would that be correct?
It's not even close.
Not even close.
Beating Thurston on the road is by far and away the best win anybody could have had this season. Now, if Marist had beaten Silverton fairly handily, that would have been probably equal to beating Thurston on the road. But Silverton ended up beating Marist, so it's a moot point. But yes, it's by far and away the best win for anybody in 4A this year.
Yeah. And then, kind of with Gladstone, it's my understanding is they're viewed as they haven't played the most challenging schedule. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The thing about Gladstone is they have some dudes. Let me preface it with they have some dudes, and they're well coached, and it's an established program. It's all the things you want in a top 5 team. Okay. So there's that. But there is a concern about the schedule, and last week we spent a whole lot of time in Capital defending them because there was some obscure possible matchup with Cascade that didn't happen. I still don't know the whole scope of that. I've given up on it. But Gladstone beat Crook County handily, and they beat Estacada week 1. And Estacada is a real football team. Estacada is a top 10 team. I believe we have them at 8 or 7 right now. Crook County, as much as they're, not in the top 10 of most people right now, they are a solid team. In a normal year, they would be a team that, okay, they're going on the road to Banks in week 1. That's an upset alert type team right there because they're solid. So you take it to a team like Crook County, you have a resume right there. But it's the games against the Malalas and the Madrasas and those type teams that tend to make people worried and then lead to that ambiguity of, are they 4 or are they 9?
Yeah.
That's what Gladstone's in right now.
So the committee, they're having their final meeting Saturday to determine the rankings. Which is going to cause, what's going to cause just like probably the consensus, like, they got this right.
You will have a consensus number 1 versus number 2 game if Mazama wins this week convincingly, which I believe they play Klamath Union, which
should be
a win by a comfortable margin. And then the winner of Marshfield Marist wins by a comfortable margin. If Marist wins that game by 35, they might not just be the 2, they might be the 1. If Marshfield wins that by 35 points, they probably won't be the 1, but they will certainly be the 2. So that's where you will have your BCS matchup that you'll feel comfortable with. Now, is Hidden Valley in that? Should Hidden Valley be in that conversation? Probably, but at the moment they're boxed out. So that's the kind of situation where you'd have the most amount of comfortability in your final matchup, is if both of those, if Mazama wins and the Marshfield Marist result comes in lopsided.
Okay, so Marshfield and Marist, they're playing this week.
Yes.
Okay, so that's almost kind of like a playing game, basically.
It is, really.
Okay. Man, I just when I just got this when they came out with this a couple weeks ago, or it's only really last week, I was just like, oh man, this is just gonna be some sort of mess, because you just know there's gonna be a team left out that's like, oh no, we should have been here. And like as good as Hidden Valley is, and the like I don't think anyone would be surprised if they could beat Mazama or any of these teams, but it's just like, man, when you're have a full season and you don't play as many, it's just kind of tough. It's kind of tough to be like, let's put them in.
Well, and the other thing to recognize is if we had a full season, if COVID hadn't been a thing, Hidden Valley would also be sporting the best quarterback in the state right now.
That's true. That's true.
It'd just be another level of, then if we were talking about a BCS final and Hidden Valley was excluded, we'd all be up in arms.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a situation that is probably could have been avoided. Again, it's admirable in its aim, but probably not the right moment.
Yeah. Well, soccer and volleyball seem to have the right plan, but obviously they can play multiple games in a week, and football you really can't. So
yeah, that's the difference, is
Mhm.
that you can play in the case of some sports, you can play multiple games in a day.
Yeah.
But football's just you can't do it.
Well, I'm looking forward to whatever happens Saturday for OPrep's Twitter to be pretty lively.
Yes, Saturday this week should be pretty lively, and I would say the rankings would probably come out Saturday evening, considering that Marshfield Marist game isn't going to start until 1
Okay.
on Saturday. So those rankings probably will not come out until late Saturday or even Sunday morning, if I had to guess.
All right.
Especially if that result is close.
Well, Robbie, hey, thank you so much for hopping on for a little bit, and enjoy the work you guys do over at Mid Major Media. So keep it up, and I'm sure we'll talk more along the way.
See ya.
All right, have a good one.